Giuseppe Muscati, also known as Joseph Muscati, was born in Benevento on July 25, 1880. He was the seventh born of 9 children. His father, Francisco, was an elite lawyer and magistrate in the area, and his mother, Rosa, was of noble birth. In 1887, Francisco moved his family from Benevento to Ancona. The family was very happy. The children were taught at home, as was custom in those days due to social rank and status, and each child had their own tutor. Francisco and Rosa took their faith as seriously as their children's education, if not even more so, and said the rosary every night. Despite his busy schedule, Francisco made family time top priority and ensured that they all vacationed every year in Santa Lucia di Sereno, taking long walks with his children through the fields and mountains. Giuseppe grew up learning an appreciation for God's beauty through nature, and often as an adult, he would continue his father's tradition by taking vacation to places of art, flowers, and nature. His father also attended daily mass, taking his children with him, and he not only received daily, but also at times assisted at mass. Afterwards, they would say their thanksgiving together, kneeling, as one observer put it, as still as statues. In 1893, the family experienced a tragedy that would make a deep impression on Giuseppe. His older brother, Alberto, who was in the military academy in Turin, fell off his horse, hitting his head. As a result, he began to suffer from seizures. He was forced to return home the following year, and it was only then that his family realized how bad the seizures had gotten. Sometimes they would last an entire day. Giuseppe, who was 10 years younger than his brother, spent many hours with his brother while he had these seizures, giving him comfort. This disorder eventually took its toll, and Alberto died on June 2, 1904. Through this experience, watching his brother suffer, Giuseppe began to contemplate pursuing medicine rather than following his father's footsteps in law. In the meantime, Giuseppe had been enrolled in elementary school and had done exceptionally well. After secondary school, he earned his diploma in 1897, and at this point, he had a decision to make as to which career he would take. Everyone expected him to take after his father and become a judge, but Giuseppe announced he wanted to be a doctor. His father had always encouraged his sons to follow their hearts, but Giuseppe's mother tried to dissuade Giuseppe's decision. Giuseppe said to her, "What are you saying, Mama? I'm ready to even lie down in a patient's bed." He enrolled in the University of Naples to study medicine, but the family received another blow. His father unexpectedly died on December 21st of the same year. He had suffered a cerebral hemorrhage and was able to receive the sacraments for the last time and give instructions to his firstborn son, Gennaro, for the care of the family. This death was especially hard on Giuseppe, who looked to his father in everything. At the university, Giuseppe was forced to live in the openly agnostic and atheistic atmosphere in its secret societies, which often had rallies in the public squares. He didn't allow it to distract him. Instead, he took it upon himself to recognize that his main duty as a student was to learn. He focused on his studies and continued to practice his faith. One classmate who sat next to Giuseppe states, "He was attentive, serious, and very composed. But what really impressed me was how he, as just a beginner, answered all the questions the professor asked his students very quietly to himself, without being heard by anyone except those who were near him. There was no question, even a difficult one, that he didn't answer promptly, even though it went without an answer from the more experienced students. His humble and diligent attitude paid off for him, and in 1903, he graduated with honors, earning a degree in medicine. He also won a competition for temporary assistant at the hospital. Even though, with all his accomplishments, awards, and talents, he could have taken a professorial chair at the university, he preferred the position of teacher and doctor in continuing research studies. Although everyone who knew him both personally and professionally admired him, Giuseppe preferred to stay in the background. However, in April of 1906, God put him in the foreground by using him to save hundreds of people when the volcano Vesuvius erupted. Moved by the terror and panic of the people, Giuseppe went to the hospital in Torre del Greco, which was a town near the volcano and in danger of lava and ash, and told the director of the hospital to leave. He then helped the most disabled patients out of the building and loaded them into the waiting automobiles that were ordered to bring them to Naples. He was able to get each patient out before the roof of the building collapsed from the weight of the ash. 2 days later, he sent a letter to the director of health asking him to recognize and reward those who helped all the patients out of the hospital, never once mentioning his own part in it. In 1911, he again stepped in to help when the city was hit with a widespread epidemic of cholera, treating both the poor and the patients, as well as making house calls to the dying. What made Professor Muscati so unique to others is that he never wanted honors or prestige, and he didn't want wealth or status, even though with his high intelligence and reputation, he could have easily climbed to the top. One colleague said, Professor Muscati performed another painful act of self-denial, passing up the tenured professorship that he would have obtained if he had wanted it. He did this for love of his hospital and of his students. Free from all earthly ambition, he dedicated himself entirely to his patients and to the education of young doctors. The hospital became his home, his love, his sanctuary. Even as a young boy, Giuseppe was drawn to the hospital of the incurables. There he saw the faces of Jesus. To his interns, he didn't just want to teach them medicine, but how to see the soul. Suffering should be treated not as a twitch or a muscular contraction, but as the cry of a soul to whom another brother, the doctor, with the ardent love of charity. Giuseppe always tried to stay up to date with the latest medical research, not for vain reasons, but because he felt it was essential to learn as much as possible to help others in the best way possible. Back then, medicine was regarded as more of an art than a science, as it relied heavily on intuition, experience, and skill. And Professor Muscati possessed all of these qualities, including the talent of intuition. He believed that an accurate diagnosis was not just made in the laboratory, but also through conversation with the patient and listening to their symptoms. When at times he couldn't figure out a diagnosis, he resorted to prayer. His greatest resource beyond knowledge and books was his humility. He wrote to a former student about this, regarding what to do when a doctor realizes their own limitations. What can we doctors do? Very little. Therefore, being unable to help the body, let us help the soul. Professor Muscati learned much about the human body through autopsies. However, he always treated the bodies with the utmost respect, even reverence. In the autopsy room, he always hung a crucifix. His students noted that before picking up any instrument, he would look at the crucifix for a long time before turning his attention to the cadaver. This humility was fed through the daily reception of the Eucharist. Every morning before going to the university and the hospital, he would go to Mass. If at times he was unable to go in the mornings, he would go to Mass at night after his house calls. Along with his love for Jesus and the Eucharist, he had a deep devotion to the Blessed Mother. Once he remarked to a friend, "What sweetness I experience receiving communion at the feet of Our Lady. It seems to me that I become littler, and I tell her things as they are." He especially had a devotion to Our Lady of Good Counsel and Our Lady of Pompeii. He recited the Rosary often, and on her feast days added in extra prayers and the divine offices. Even to his students and the sick, he would talk about Our Lady, inspiring anyone who would listen to develop a relationship with her. Not only did he ensure that he received communion every day, but he also instructed his students to receive the sacraments as often as possible, believing that this was what made a good doctor. A former student testified, he urged his students to receive the sacraments while leaving them completely free, and although he very often recommended the regular reception of Holy Communion, he did so with only persons he was close to and whose religious education he knew about. By prayer, devotion to Mary, and the reception of the Eucharist, Professor Muscati was able to practice heroic virtue. One of these virtues was to remain poor when he could have been rich. He chose to dress neatly, but simply, and to walk rather than drive, never owning a car. His student testified. We young students asked Muscati why he did not have an automobile like his colleagues. At that question, he became annoyed and said, "I am poor. Because of my obligations, I do not have the means to take such an expense. I ask you to believe me." In fact, when his relatives pressured him to buy a house more suitable for a doctor, he said, "I assure you, I have only 20,000 lira in my account." This, in US dollars, comes to $11.11. He was poor, however, this was by choice, as he very rarely accepted payment from his patients, as most of them were poor as well. If he did accept a payment, it was to save the dignity of the proud, and he would heavily discount the fee. It should also be noted that he even left money for prescriptions for some of his poorer patients. One time he was called to the bedside of a sick woman. As he could see that she was dying, he asked her, as was his custom with every patient, if she had received the sacraments. After doing what he could to make her comfortable and praying with her, he left, accepting an envelope from the family of 1,000 lira. But seeing the family's poverty, he told them, "I forgot to say something to the patient. May I go back and see her?" He went to the bed and whispered something in her ear and then left. After the woman died a few days later, as they were preparing the body, they found the envelope of 1,000 lira under her pillow. One colleague testified to Dr. Muscati's charity. As a matter of principle, he made his visits to the sick only as an apostolate and not for the money. He made most of his visits free of charge. For this reason, the poor would come to him in droves. There used to be a set fee of 10 lira for house calls among himself and his colleagues, but the other doctors viewed this as detracting from their own interests because most people were going to Dr. Muscati and his colleague rather than them. So only to help his colleagues, Dr. Muscati raised his fee from 10 lira to 20 lira, but continued to make many of his house calls free of charge. In addition to living simply, choosing not to own expensive suits or a car or live in a fancy house, in fact, many people considered his apartment to be difficult to get to because of a long, narrow staircase. He also chose to eat simply. He fasted often and never ate meat. He kept all his meals rather bland and simple. If he ever did eat at anyone's house, he would politely explain that he fasted from meat and therefore not to waste any on him and to give him only the vegetables. This he did not out of pride, but so as not to hurt his host's feelings. In addition to choosing holy poverty, Dr. Muscati felt inspired to make a vow of chastity in order to be free to serve the sick as much as possible. However, he didn't encourage his students in celibacy, but rather pointed them to marriage, recognizing that his chastity was a gift from God. He would say to his students who inquired him about this, "I consider celibacy the privilege of a few." So many listened to his advice about marriage that oftentimes he served as best man at their wedding. With all his travels on foot to see his patients, long hours of research and lectures at the university, as well as his rounds in the hospital, everything caught up to Dr. Muscati one day. After starting a normal workday and seeing patients in his home, he sat down in between appointments, feeling rather tired, crossed his arms, closed his eyes, and died. Later, it would be discovered that he died of a heart attack. He was only 46 years old. The news of his death spread quickly around the town, and soon, the apartment building was filled with his colleagues, students, patients, but mostly the poor that he served. The miracle for his canonization was the cure of a young man who was dying of leukemia. His mother dreamed of a doctor in a white coat, whom she identified when her pastor showed her a photo of Blessed Giuseppe. Through his intercession, her son was cured and returned to his job as an ironworker. This young man's name was Giuseppe, just like his intercessor. Saint Giuseppe Muscati was canonized by Pope John Paul II in 1987. He is the patron saint of physicians, bachelors in biochemistry.